Hey, everyone. Long time no record. I'm back after I didn't even want to look and see how many months, but I'm back with another episode of the Good Mood podcast. As many of you know, things have been very busy. I finished my master's of counseling psychology degree, so I have graduated. I am practicing as a registered psychotherapist and accepting clients. And so in addition to just finishing off all the papers and assignments and hours for my the last term and getting my degree, I have also been setting up my psychotherapy practice and getting all of that off the ground. And so it's going great. And so I'm offering both naturopathic medicine in one practice and registered psychotherapy in another. So if you have questions about that, just send me an email. And then I also took on the massive project of transferring all of my courses. So, as you know, I offer educational material at the Good Mood Project. And I was previously on a platform that had recurring yearly costs, and I moved to a platform that has a one-time cost. So I am securely and stably situated now in ThriveCart. And so if you've purchased a course in the past, you have lifetime access. So reach out to me because I did my best to send emails to everyone, letting them know how to log in and get their access information and make an account. If you're missing that information, let me know. And if you're interested in purchasing a course, they're discounted currently. So they're sitting at a nice low cost. And there's a bundle in which you can get 4 courses for a very low rate. So essentially, you're getting an entire course for free if you get this bundle. And I'm going to be doing new things with the Good Mood Project. We're going to be running courses live, hopefully in the future. And I'll be offering some mental health courses, some self-care courses, nervous system regulation stuff, meditation. I see a whole bunch of stuff in the future for the Good Mood Project. So stay tuned. And finally, the last project, what I'm working on right now, is a microbiome and mental health course for another platform for a really cool project it's just in the works currently. So I'm doing a lot of research for this course. And so I'll let you know about this as it comes. It's really exciting. It's a great and wonderful opportunity and cool collaboration that I'm doing. So I'm doing a ton of research on the microbiome, and this is obviously something I work with every single day as a naturopathic doctor. I think about this all the time, but there's always new information coming out and new research. And so I've been doing a lot of research to stay on top of things because a lot of studies, a lot of canonical and really interesting studies have come out in 2023. So just in the last year. And the study I want to talk about today came out in 2021. Just I'm for me, 2021 is 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So really exciting, really cool stuff. And so, since I've been really engaged in this stuff, it's been a while. So now I'm back with everything gut. And today we're going to talk about one of the studies that came up in my research that was really important, which I'm going to screen share. And this is a study by Sonnenberg. So Justin and Erica Sonnenberg spearheaded this study. They're not the first authors, but it's their study. We know this as the Sonnenberg trial. But the first researcher is Hannah Wastick. And the study is called Gut Microbiota-Targeted Diets Modulate Human Immune Status. It's a really cool study. It was first published in Cell. I'm accessing the PubMed version, so Cell, really prestigious life sciences journal. And I want to talk about this study today because it's really cool. It's highly applicable and very pragmatic. It's a small trial. It was done on 36 people, 2 arms, 18 in each, and it was dietary intervention. Super cool. So the study starts off by testing out this theory that the microbiome can be shifted based on what we eat, and it can be shifted in a very short amount of time. And in the initial kind of introduction of the of the study, they talk about a study in which they took African Americans and rural Africans, and they switched the diets on them. So they had the African Americans eat a rural African diet, so higher in tubers and vegetables and higher in fiber, and then they had the rural Africans consume sort of an American diet. And then in only 2 weeks, they noticed a shift in their microbiome by eating the American diet. The rural Africans had a shift, an increase in cancer-causing compounds, and just an unfavorable microbiota. And the African Americans, by eating the rural African diet, had an improvement in their gut microbiota health. And this was just in 2 weeks, which is wild. So what we know about the microbiome, you may have heard me talk about this before, right? We have trillions of gut bugs in our colon. They're supposed to be living largely in our large intestine. And there's about 2 pounds of them, and they do all kinds of different things for our health. They regulate our mood, they digest our food, they help our colon feel healthy, they influence our weight and our metabolic health, whether we have diabetes, our inflammation levels, our immune function, our brain health. If you search any health condition, endometriosis, rheumatoid arthritis, cancer, and plus microbiome, you'll probably start to find that there's research being conducted on finding out what's going on in the microbiome. Is it connected to this condition? Is it because of the condition? And one of the tragedies and one of the awful things about North American society is that we have what these researchers in the Sonnenberg trial called the industrialized diet, right? So low in fiber, low in fermented foods, low in things that feed our microbiome and keep it happy. And so we suffer by having less diversity of the bacteria in our gut. And we also can suffer from something called dysbiosis, where you have some bad gut bugs that are producing endotoxins and inflammatory compounds and are causing leaky gut and swimming upstream into our small intestine and causing bloating and gas and discomfort there and constipation and all kinds of awful things. And even potentially cancers and autoimmunity and issues with our immune system. So you have all these bad gut bugs and a deficiency in good gut bugs. And this is largely thought to be because of our diet. So what the study did was it took 36 people, divided them in two, and one group, 18 people, got an increased fermented food diet, and the other group were put on a high-fiber diet. And then they took a look at what happened. So what we know is that gut bugs consume fiber. They turn it into butyrate and other good compounds. Butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid, and that helps keep our gut cells healthy, and it helps lower inflammation, and it helps our immune function and all these good things. But what we know is that we eat a pretty low-fiber diet. And you also might be thinking, and if you're a patient of mine, that if you start to eat a bunch of fiber, it can impact your gut in a negative way. You can feel bloated, you can feel uncomfortable, and there's a whole bunch of diets out there, right? The low FODMAP diet, the carnivore diet that are low in fiber, and that tends to be what people tout as the health benefit, that it's a low fiber diet. So the study took 39 participants, so 2 dropped out, so 37 actually. And they were randomized to high fermented foods, 18 people, and high fiber, 21. And what they found, so the gist of the study is that the people that were on the high fiber diet had an increased microbiome function, increased short-chain fatty acids, but had like a differed immune response. The people in the high fermented food diet, they had increased microbiome diversity and decreased inflammatory signals. So the fibers are, the Sonnenberg actually created a new term. So these are we call them fibers, but they're actually called microbiota-accessible carbohydrates, MACs. This is the new name for this. So these are all carbohydrates that don't get digested by us. So that could include resistant starches. So sometimes when you are cooking and then cooling things like rice and potatoes and even bread and all kinds of digestible carbohydrates, when you cool those down to room temperature, some of that doesn't get digested. It becomes resistant starch, and that starch can become microbiota-accessible carbohydrates that the gut bugs feed on. And then you have things like soluble fiber and inulin and what you find in chia seeds and psyllium and then cellulose from plant matter, and you have all of these different fibers that we can't digest that end up in our colon. The small bowel, the small intestine is where we absorb the carbohydrates that we can digest. We break down and absorb those. And in the large colon, whatever doesn't get absorbed and digested ends up there, and our microbiota can digest it. So the fermented food group, they started off by having 0.6. So how the trial worked was for 4 weeks, they did a ramp up phase. So they got them started on these higher fermented food, higher fiber diets, depending on which arm they were in. Then they did a 6-week maintenance phase where they just stayed at that dose for 6 weeks. And then they did a 4-week choice phase where they were allowed to decide, they were allowed to kind of eat however they wanted. So if they objectively or subjectively felt better, they could choose to continue eating this way or not. And so this was kind of allowed the researchers to see, like, what do people actually do when they're given the choice? Like, is this actually sustainable for somebody's lifestyle? Which is an interesting arm in a study. So in total, the actual active phase of the trial was 10 weeks, but there's that extra 4 weeks where they had a choice. And so the participants that were in the fiber group, their baseline level of dietary fiber was about 21 grams a day of fiber. And they ramp that up by the maintenance phase to 45 grams per day. So that's a pretty significant, more than double increase. And those fibers were from vegetables, carbohydrates, grains. That there was a specific way that they classified that. But what we know from the American Gut Project is that these types of fibers can be in all types of different foods. They can be all different types of fibers. That's why the Sonnenbergs just simplified it to MAX, to microbiota-accessible carbohydrates. And what they found in the American Gut Project was that people that ate 30 different plant foods a week had more microbial diversity in their guts. So, it could be chia, it could be whole grains, it could be starches and tubers and fruit and nuts and seeds and legumes and anything with fiber. The fermented food group went from eating 0.5 servings a day of fermented foods to 6.3 servings by the time they were in the maintenance phase. And so the fermented foods included dairy fermented foods, so like kefir, yogurt, and then vegetable fermented foods, so sauerkraut and kimchi and things like that. So fermented foods are foods that have been cultivated with bacteria, and those bacteria proliferate and they create compounds in the fermented foods, right? So when you consume milk versus yogurt, the yogurt has a sour taste. You're tasting some of the breakdown products of the bacteria that have been used to ferment the yogurt. And so those fermentation products are beneficial to us in and of themselves. And then it's thought that those foods contain probiotics, so bacteria that could be beneficial when added to our gut ecosystem. So fiber is a prebiotic. It's the food that feeds the bacteria that's already in our gut. The fermented foods are probiotics, potentially. And so they really increase their fermented foods. So both people experienced bloating and some aggravation initially when they began increasing these foods. And then that sort of leveled off after a certain time. So you just see the graph here. By the ramp up phase, they were up to something like 50 grams a day of fiber, and then they maintained that. And then they kind of fell off. With the fermented foods, they were up to six servings, almost 7 servings. And then again, they also fell off. But both groups in their choice phase, they were at a higher dose of either fiber or fermented foods than they had been previously. But things fell off as a naturopathic doctor. I know how that works. When people have a hard time maintaining lifestyle changes. And a lot of that just comes down to habit change. So what they found at the end of it was that the high fiber diet and fermented foods change the gut microbiota. So their hypothesis was that they would see lower inflammation in both groups. But what actually happened, so they did see a lot lower inflammation in the fermented food group. The people in the fermented food group, their inflammatory cytokines, these molecules that create inflammation, so pain, swelling, brain fog, depression, weight gain, bloating, like all those bad things that you don't want, all of those, these inflammatory cytokines drive inflammation. And of the 93 inflammatory cytokines, 19 decreased. Things like IL-6 and TNF alpha. And there's really like inflammatory, dangerous cytokines went down. And in the fiber group, there were mixed results. So some people had lower levels of inflammation and some didn't. Both groups experienced an increase and a shift in their microbiota. So there was an improvement in the types of bacteria, the species. But in the high fiber group, there wasn't this really distinct shift in inflammation. And this goes along with what I notice as a naturopathic doctor. So any course I've ever taken on gut health, whether it's academic course, any podcast I've ever listened to, any book I've ever read, any study I've ever read, it always touts the benefits of fiber. It always tells us we need to be, including this podcast, it talks about how we don't need enough fiber in our industrialized society, other populations in the world, hunter-gatherer populations, rural populations that have healthier gut microbiota and less disease, eat more fiber. And this is the issue with the Western diet. It's one of the major issues with Western diet. This is having a massive effect on our microbiome, and this is causing health issues. But then when I or my patients go to eat more fiber, we experience gas and bloating, and it seems to just aggravate all of our symptoms, right? Especially if you have IBS. And this is the whole premise of the low FODMAP diet, is to restrict these microbiota-accessible carbohydrates like fructans, oligosaccharides, monosaccharides, disaccharides, polyols. The carnivore diet, all of these people who are following carnivore, who are saying how great it is for weight loss, for brain health, keto diet, all these low fiber diets people are following. And when they add fiber, things aggravate. And this is what was seen in the Sonnenberg study. So what the researchers hypothesized was when you add a bunch of food to an unhealthy gut, it's kind of like throwing fertilizer on a mess of a garden, right? So if you show up to a plot of land and there's a lot of weeds, maybe there's a couple of plants that you want there, good plants, herbs or flowers or whatever, and the soil is just not great, and you just throw a bunch of fertilizer, it could be natural fertilizer and water and stuff on the soil, everything's going to grow. And a lot of stuff is going to grow that you don't want there, right? Like those weeds. And so, yes, it's possible that when we feed good food to the good bugs in our gut, that we can start to see a favorable balance in our gut microbiota. But when we have a lot of stuff in there that's unfavorable, when we have infiltration in the small intestines, we have SIBO, we have SIFO, we have small intestinal fungal overgrowth, we have, bad bacteria. When we feed them food, they're also going to proliferate. And so depending on what somebody's gut microbiome looked like, they would have sometimes a detrimental effect when adding more fiber. So the researchers suggest it probably wasn't long enough. It's possible that it could take longer to slowly increase fiber to start to see this shift, because perhaps the participant has gone however many years without eating enough fiber, excess sanitation, lack of breastfeeding, C-section delivery, antibiotic use, alcohol, food sensitivities, stress, all of these things can impact our microbiome and create this dysbiosis. And then when we just add fiber, right, we're just adding fertilizer to this messed up garden, and that can wreak havoc and it can cause some aggravation initially. So they were surprised by these findings, but they figured that had the group continued, they would have seen some shifts. What they also found that was interesting is that the species that increased in the fermented food group weren't necessarily bacteria that were in the actual fermented foods. So there's something about fermented food, and possibly it's the microbes that you introduce, possibly it's the fermentation products that support a healthy microbiota diversity. So it might wake up gut bugs that are in there, might support them. But we're seeing these increase in healthy microbiota gut bugs that weren't in the food they were eating. So, there was something happening by increasing those fermented foods that was just shifting the profile, and the reduction in inflammation was really significant. And yeah, so very interesting, because this study has a lot of implications, right? Because we know that fermented foods, there's been some research that they decrease diabetes, and we know that 88% of people have metabolic dysfunction. They can decrease the risk of cancer, cardiovascular disease, and they improve microbiota diversity. And we also know that chronic inflammation is associated with all types of health issues, right? Rheumatoid arthritis, type 2 diabetes, chronic stress. So very interesting study. And as I'm researching more and more about the microbiome, I'm just thinking more and more about my diet and, how I approach patient health as well. Sometimes with patients, we're, looking at nutrients and are you on the right vitamins? And protein is a huge thing in my practice, of course, as if you know me, right? And blood sugar regulation and HPA access and stress. But the microbiome is such a low-hanging fruit. It's, I recently had a case of somebody who has depression, has had it for many decades, and has not had any benefit in a strange way, where things that normally should have benefits, so certain amino acids, things that would even produce a temporary benefit, haven't done anything. Medications haven't worked. Nothing has worked. Treatments like transmagnetic cranial stimulation hasn't worked. And it's just so peculiar to me. And then this person also had some functional tests done with another practitioner, and we saw all kinds of species in the gut that were dysbiotic and unfavorable. So it just reminded me, without having done those tests, I don't know if I would have thought that it was a gut case, because sometimes there aren't a lot of gut symptoms in gut cases. But we were able then to do something that no other practitioner had done and access this different part of health, right? Rather than throwing supplements like B vitamins and magnesium and tyrosine and whatever else on this person, even a probiotic, just throwing a probiotic at the person, like, here, this might help. We're able to understand, okay, specifically what microbiota were infecting the gut, and applying antimicrobial herbs to kill them and to create a shift. So essentially weeding the garden so we can reseed it and then observe that impact on health. And then we can, by increasing fiber and supporting a healthy gut, we can maintain and support that microbiota. I'm also thinking a lot about the coconut yogurt that I created, that I used to do a lot, and I started making again, where I am taking probiotics and I'm fermenting them. So one of the, probiotics, they can be expensive. It's hard to know what kind to take. We don't know a lot. Like, there are studies on very specific strains of probiotics that show specific outcomes, such as, like, this probiotic strain is helpful for constipation, or this probiotic strain is helpful for anxiety. But what we don't really know is how certain strains act in our gut. Just like in this Sonnenberg trial, it may not even be the actual strains we're introducing. It might be their A, fermentation products, and B, how they activate pre-existing or increase strains that are already present in the gut. And so there's a synergistic effect, right? So two or more strains may work together in a way that's different from any one strain. So prescribing probiotics is always a little bit of a, no pun intended, crapshoot. where you're just kind of like, I usually will go for a multi-strain because there's a potential for synergistic effects. And then I will guide based on research picking certain strains, but a lot of the time it's really difficult to find the exact strain used in a study. And so what I have been doing, according to this is the work of William Davis, the author of Super Gut, who also did Wheat Belly. He recommends, fermenting things. And so I've started to open up capsules of my probiotic into coconut milk and let it ferment on my counter. And you can do this in a more professional way by using a yogurt maker, adding prebiotic fibers and sugars and stuff like that to give it some food. But I've been doing it just a really easy way. And so by fermenting the food, first of all, there's a food matrix in which you introduce that probiotic. So you're accessing, it's protecting it, it's allowing it to transit the gut and then interact with your gut lining and interact with the other bacteria that are in there. It's also helping to proliferate and grow the colony forming units so that you're getting more cultures, you're getting more bacteria. And so you're getting a higher dose that just taking a pill may not give you access to. And you're also saving money because a bottle of 30 probiotics, if I'm using like 6 for a liter of coconut yogurt, it's going to last me so much longer. So I've been starting to do that again, and then also just paying attention to fermented foods. And one of the things that I should say too about this Sonnenberg trial is the fermented foods used, and this is important to note, so things like sauerkraut, pickles, kimchi, these were all found in the refrigerated section of the grocery store. So you can make them yourself, or you can access them in the refrigerated section, right? Because the ones that are just found on the shelf are often preserved, and therefore the bacteria are not alive. Further, and this is a tip by William Davis, so when we ferment foods, like if you're making your own sauerkraut, you might be fermenting it for a week. I ferment my coconut yogurt for 72 hours, so 3 days. When there's a large scale kind of industrial thing going on where someone's making a product, they are often not fermenting things very long. Like when people are making yogurt to sell at a store, they're maybe fermenting it for a few hours. And so you're maybe not getting as much proliferation of the healthy probiotics that you could. So he recommends when you buy sauerkraut, so get it from the fridge section and leave it on the counter covered, so with like a cheesecloth or paper towel, leave it for 48 hours uncovered to allow further fermentation of the product before putting it in your fridge and then consuming it. So I thought this was a really cool tip. So yeah, I'm increasing my kombucha. I'm doing my coconut yogurt. I'm going to grab some sauerkraut. I'm slowly introducing fibers like psyllium, increasing my ground flaxseed, eating lots of cabbage. And I'm doing further research on the gut microbiome to share some stuff with all of you. So let me know how things have been going with your guts. How are you feeling? I also looked at some Viome test results. So that's another thing I also want to mention is, how do you test for gut health? So in this particular patient, it was a stool sample culture. So doctor's data tests like that, where you send a stool sample into a lab and they culture your stool, meaning they grow it in a petri dish. And then they test to see, they give it some mediums and they see what grows. Okay, so these are live bacteria that are present in your gut and that are active. And then they also test to see what antimicrobials, including pharmaceuticals, kill those bacteria. So this is all done like outside of your body in a petri dish. How that applies internally, it's iffy. We're not exactly sure. And it's not a very sensitive test, although it's highly specific. Not sensitive meaning that there may be a lot missed, because not everything will be cultured that could be in your gut, and not everything's going to pass into your stool. The test is also quite expensive, about $500. And I have run that test a few times, including on myself, and not found anything. So that's a risk, and it doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing going on with the gut, but it feels like that is an expenditure that patients could have spent elsewhere. Then food sensitivity tests are not necessarily validated. A lot of people ask for them and want to see them. They can be a really rough guide to whether you have leaky gut or whether you're reacting to foods or what foods your body is mounting an immune response against, but they're simply not accurate enough to be used as a diagnosis. And so the gold standard for understanding a food sensitivity is an elimination diet. And if you do the $300 food sensitivity test, you still have to do an elimination diet. And I'm still going to tell you, if you're doing the elimination diet, I'm still going to tell you to take out dairy, gluten, and sugar, and then maybe a couple other things that showed up on that test. But if that test is showing like oysters and pecans and you don't eat those foods, then it's clearly not, that's clearly not accurate. And it probably doesn't make sense to even think about avoiding them, although you don't really eat them anyways. Then there's the PCR tests and the transcriptase test. So there's the GI map test and Viome. And GI map is probably the more popular one, where they're looking at, they're synthesizing RNA via PCR to see what's in your stool and therefore what's in your gut. So they're analyzing more about the stool microbiota and looking at, what's coming out in the stool. Are you digesting your fats? Are there inflammatory markers? That test can be helpful. It's also very expensive, around $500. And the one that I have recommended more, because it used to be quite affordable, was Viome, which uses AI and a specific technology that prints out all of the RNA that they find in your stool related to your gut microbiome, tells you what strains you have, tells you kind of what's going on with your gut in terms of fermentation and inflammation, and then gives you a list of foods that it predicts you would do well with or not well with. So I've run Viome myself a couple times. It used to be something like $150. Now it's a little bit more, but it's still a lot more affordable than the GI map and the other tests. Not diagnostic. It's not a clinically valid test either. None of them are. But I was looking through some of the bacteria, because you get this readout of all of the bacteria that are found in your gut, including parasites. And so I was kind of going through and learning and sort of revisiting what was going on with my gut back in 2021, which is probably the same thing that's going on with my gut now. And so I've been getting more into adding some fibers, looking at antimicrobial herbs to clear SIBO and SIFO, and adding some fermented foods to support healthy gut microbiota, because there were some things in there that I would like to feed. There's a couple strains in there that were really positive. So been really diving in. Let me know your questions and what you think about this. Have you heard of this study? And how have you been supporting your gut? Have you been doing fermented foods? Have you been increasing your fiber? What happens when you do? What types of fiber are you eating? My favorite, psyllium. I feel like that is the best tolerated. It doesn't cause a lot of side effects. And resistant starches can be really helpful too. And so let me know what you think and stay tuned to hear more about this course that we're working on.